Thank you so much for joining us again on the second iteration of putting the H in HASS. Last, I guess, 2 weeks ago, we were talking about this and sharing top insights from 2022. After, recognizing that we really need to spend a lot more time talking about the H in the HASS project. And just for a brief introduction, I wanted to go around the room and introduce all of our panelists. So I'll start. I'm Ellen Jefferson. I'm the president and CEO of Austin Pets Alive and a co-leader of co-founder of the Human Animal Support Services Project. I'll pass it over to Vincent.
Hello, I'm Vincent Medley. I am the Maddie's Human Animal Support Services Project Director, and I started in September and have been in the animal welfare movement for 20 years.
Diaz?
I'll dive on in. I'm Diaz Dixon, and I am the Maddie's advisor for partnerships and collaborations. And we are, and I have a long history of working in the social service world on the human side, as well as a little bit running a nonprofit resource center for pets here in Northern Nevada. So happy to be here because I love this engagement and crossover. Alexis.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Alexis Telfair-Garcia. I'm the Social Work Program Development Manager at Austin Pets Alive. I've been with the team since September, and similar to Diaz, my background is in human services. So I'm happy to be the resident people person over at APA.
Awesome. Well, we were just overwhelmed with the number of questions and really good questions that came out of the last webinar, and on the spot, I think decided to do a part 2 to this discussion. So thank you for participating so heavily. We hope you do that again this time. We're also incredibly grateful to Maddie's Fund for believing in the HASS project and helping to propel it forward so graciously. And lastly, I just wanted to quickly say that HASS stands for Human Animal Support Services, and it's a project of Austin Pets Alive that we are working on recognizing the need. The whole project has 3 prongs. One is testing human support programming across 20 plus pilot organizations. The second one is creating the resources necessary for policymakers, the public, and our own stakeholders to be successful in turning the tide from impoundment to more of a point of entry system into the world of social services for humans and pets experiencing crisis. And the third is building up a collective voice for change. And so before we dive into those questions that we got at the last webinar, we all wanted to take a minute to acknowledge the death of Tyree Nichols. And I wanted to turn it over to Alexis to lead us in that conversation as the social worker on this call.
Sure. So we're all devastated out of the news out of Memphis and really want to take time to acknowledge that what happened in Memphis to Tyree Nichols was especially heinous and was terrible and heartbreaking, especially to the communities of color. And we want to kind of just present to you all that it is really important to acknowledge these moments, especially with staff, and to allow space for staff to process those feelings and process what's going on for them, whatever that may be. And encourage you all in your organizations respectively to do that. I don't know if Vincent and Diaz want to add anything to that.
Yeah, Alexis, I think that it's really important for us to create that safe space within the environments that we have, whether it's the home or the workplace, to let people know that these type of things that are building on us and we're seeing in front of us have an impact on all of us. Sometimes we hold things in. Historically, we've been taught not to talk about certain things and to sweep them under the rug. We know that 1 in 5 Americans in particular are struggling with mental health issues, and a lot of that is because we hold so much stuff in. So when something so heinous happens right before our very eyes and we're seeing it and we're wondering why these patterns keep happening, we need to make sure that we're allowing ourselves to grieve and allowing ourselves to have those safe places. And as leaders, I believe we all are leaders. We all have a role and the duty, even for Tyree to be able to say his name, give others to be able to do so.
Yeah, just to add on to your to your words, Diaz, just about us being leaders, and you probably can hear my husky in the background, but hopefully it doesn't disturb what we're doing. Just no matter what your race is, no matter what your background is, as a leader in the shelter, I'm sure you'll have staff that are really affected. And my encouragement is just it will be awkward, so don't feel like it's out of the ordinary for you to feel awkward. Even for me, it would be awkward, just because I don't know everyone's background and how they feel. But then also just be authentic and raw with your staff, and support them in any way you can. And then also remember the resources that you have available within your shelter, whether it's your employee assistance program, or just finding a forum for them to express themselves, and whether it's their feelings or their fears, just creating that culture and environment. This is a really great opportunity. Unfortunately, it happened with someone's death, to continue to make better inroads into our staff as human beings, and our community as well.
Yeah. We think about those structural barriers when we talk about the H in HASS, and we talk about how it's affecting communities that need us most. It's really important to acknowledge that those same structural barriers exist in all of our organizations, right? And we need to be able to kind of face those head on and acknowledge them, so that way we can start to heal and repair.
And I'm glad you say that too. When we're looking at, Alexis, our own systems that we work and operate, live, pray, and eat in, there are always people who can go rogue. When we're looking at those particular Memphis police officers who were hired to do something that they ended up becoming. And, we can have people, not that it is as heinous in our shelters, but we can have things that happen where small groups form because they forget what their mission is. They forget the vision of what we're trying to accomplish. And they create toxic subcultures within our culture. So there is a lot to learn from this, not only having the empathy for the side of the human side, where the person has passed away, and the family and communities that are involved in that, but also how do we strengthen our own system to make sure that we're on the same page, and that we're always paying attention to the human side, that human element that is much more delicate than we often credit to.
Well, and also, especially as the project of the Human Animal Support Services project, it's just a reminder to me about how we can continue to build community through our programming and our approach and our philosophy, and have those assets in the community, so that whatever we are, whenever we go into the community, we feel safe, the community feels safe, and how do we make our world a better place, and a place where healing happens through our programs. And that doesn't stop just because I put on, I put on a uniform for 17, 18 years. And my humanity doesn't stop when I put on my uniform. In fact, it should increase, because I do have access to resources, and I do have the ability to connect people, and to information that they may not have. So it really has given me an inspiration to continue to preach the message of using my power for good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting you talk about using the power for good. We all have some type of power, and in the roles that we play, how we're hired, whatever the hierarchy is in a family. And we have to be really, really careful if we don't continue to evaluate what's the purpose of having that power, what's behind it. How do we make our communities a better place? How do we make our shelters or our workplace a better place? How do we make our home better place. And
Yeah.
the times when humans are making mistakes and doing things that are harmful, it's an abuse of power.
Yeah, it starts at home. Starts at home, it starts in-house. So
Well, and thank you, Dr. Jefferson, for allowing us to take a moment to acknowledge that, because we are stretching ourselves. It's important for us not to be myopic. It's important that we're not just looking inside the animal industry. Everything that goes on around us in the human world impacts all of us. We're a part of it.
Yeah, and it's been a part of so many conversations recently that I think that I'm glad that this group wanted to address it in this meeting. And I know that probably a lot of people that are watching, may have more questions about how to be more transparent about this subject and even myself, more just inclusive of dialogue in our daily work. And so I think and certainly if there are questions that people have and want to put them in the chat, we're open to trying to address them. But I think just starting, it sounds like from what I'm learning is just starting is the best way to go. So anyway, I want to make sure we do answer a lot of the questions that came in. Are y'all ready to move to the next one? Okay,
yeah.
great. Or the first one, I should say. Okay, so there were several questions about mission alignment and talking about moving to more of a human-centered paradigm within shelters and rescue groups. And I wanted to start by asking Diaz about that and specifically pointing to one of these questions that came in. And one of those was, how do you navigate a change in a more people-centric goals within your organization from a logistical standpoint, but also in terms of bringing your staff along?
Well, that's a great question. And I think the first thing is to gather awareness to how much your staff actually understands about the human service world that's out there. If there's a huge void and they're completely clueless, or maybe they've worked in the industry, or there's some people that have worked outside of animal welfare and come inside, they can be champions. They can be resources as we're talking about how we're going to bridge these gaps. If there's a complete void, they don't know anything. Now we know we're starting at the very, very bottom. We're going to say, okay, let's do some research. Let's come up with some concepts. What are some organizations out there that we can think who naturally fit to collaborate with? And the reason why I would want to ask the staff is because they get to be a part of this journey and giving the feedback along the way, rather than you coming in as a leader saying, okay, we're going to do this. You'll get much greater buy-in, and we can learn together as we work our way through. In the human world, I think the most successful organizations are ones that collaborate really well because they understand the importance of connection. They understand that the world is a much more than just virtual interactions. It's much more than physical. There's this huge combination of just having the relationships, the closeness. And when we can learn more about what's in our community and actually have the phone to be able to pick up and call, as opposed to handing someone a resource list, the other side is going to do a much better job at who we called for in that connection and yield positive results for our community, positive results for that human, positive results for the pet they own or that they almost parted with, so that we can bridge those gaps. So yeah, I think ultimately it's identifying the awareness piece with your own staff and then putting together a plan and allowing them to be a part of the solutions in doing so.
That's awesome. Y'all want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I think Diaz, you touched on something important too, right? When you talked about when we start to make those connections with other organizations, what will happen too is that those organizations will start to reach out to us, right? And when they say, hey, I have a client here and this client is about to lose their pet, what can we do, right? That's when the collaboration really becomes twofold, when we start to see that they are benefiting from it and we're benefiting from it too.
Yeah, there's a lot of value in that because then they've got resources, or maybe we have resources. And when they see us as a true value and being on the continuum of care, they will lean on the professional expertise that we have that they're oftentimes they're clueless about.
And what I'd add to that, and I always, harp on is, building a structure for us to be able to duplicate that relationship, or when that relationship happens, a pathway for, especially for staff, to be able to make those referrals and make those connections. And it's not as difficult as it sounds. In fact, a lot of times all it is a conversation and connecting with the right person at the right agency. And then just figuring out a pathway that your agency can best use to make that happen. And because it doesn't always mean that just because you want to build a partnership that the shelter has to take on the full responsibility. It actually makes a lot of sense also to partner, is to use that energy to help support an agency that already has the staff, the mission, the vision, the funding to make those partnerships happen.
Yeah, and I think in adding on that, so making those partnerships happen, some of us might be saying, well, I don't even know where to start. Well, a good way to start is to, if you call your food bank that's in your community and ask them, what meetings do you go to in the community? It's one thing that I know, that when I was running some of the social service programs here in Northern Nevada, the animal welfare industries were not present at a lot of these meetings. They weren't present at any of them. And so if we can show up and start connecting and really allowing people to learn more about what we're capable of doing, we become that valuable resource. So that can be a good place. And if you connect with 2 or 3 and you ask them, who else should I connect with? Who else do you think we have the opportunity to be able to help? Now, we're going into this because we're going to be helping them. But at the end of the day, it's going to be very reciprocal, like Alexis was saying.
And, I'll say this too, it's helped me to be very curious. So say, for instance, when I was out in the field as an officer and I just happened to run into a social worker that happened to be working the same case that I was working, or in terms of working the same family, you start to ask, okay, what kind of services do you have? How would I be able to, if I had another case like this, how would I be able to get that person social services rather than go straight to enforcement, or looking at that person as somebody who needs a citation. And so having a curious mind, and also something that's really helped me in my career is just walk in the door. Like, as a government of a government agent, a government official, you have a lot of ability to be able to set up meetings with different places, and say, hey, I'm Officer X, or, obviously you got to get permission from your agency to do this, and if you're in leadership, I'm so-and-so X, and, I just wanted to know, this is the problem I'm having. Don't feel like you have to solve the problem. Come to the meeting with an idea of just being willing to brainstorm with whomever it is you end up connecting with.
So I know one of the other questions we got last time fits into this, which was around mission drift. And I think that a lot of animal organizations, including my own, we struggle with how to connect the dots effectively, raising money as nonprofits, raising money from the community to help the animals in our care, promising a better future for those animals. How do you, let me back up. I would say that I think that there's fear when you start delving into the human world, that the pets are no longer your mission in the work with those animals. They lose their importance in your mission. And how, first of all, do you think that's true? And second of all, how do you deal with that?
Well, to that, Dr. J, I would say, right, like, it goes back to what we spoke about in our first session, right? Behind every hurting animal is a hurting family. And behind every animal that is helped, or every family that is helped, there's a family and a pet that stay together, right? And so if we are helping, if the fear is that we're going to step away from helping the animal, I think the reminder is that by helping the person or that family, we are helping the animal, right? We have to help kind of connect the dots with folks too.
Yeah, part of it is is because we haven't built a pathway, we look at it as living in a cul-de-sac where there's, a lot of what we are doing now and what we're discussing is moving us to a destination for that doesn't have a road built for it yet. And so there's going to be so many different ways this is going to look when it's all said and done. We at Human Animal Support Services, we are working on building a pathway, but we don't have it all the way built yet. And we're going to be reaching out to a lot of you to help us with, just imagining what it would look like. But a lot of this, don't feel like there's a solution to this problem that you just aren't getting. It's really something that's going to take all of us to brainstorm and to understand how we get to the place we want to get. And there's a lot, it's so complex, and there's a lot of answers to it, but just know that we're the pioneers of this in many ways right now.
I really like this question, because oftentimes, you'll get organizations where we start struggling and we think, oh my gosh, we need something to save me. And we start chasing dollars and chasing money. There's a grant that's over here. Let me just grab this and to keep my head above water. But then we get so far down the road and we realize that we're not going in the direction we wanted to, because at the end of the day, we have to take a look at the impact. What is the impact we want to have on our community? What is the impact we want to have on animals, the people that love them? And I look at problem solving, like I always call it PSI, like the pressure in a tire, because we got to constantly have pressure pushing so that we can drive down the road, but it's problem, solution, and impact. So if we define the impact that we want to have, then we can back into what the solutions might be and keep playing with those, because they're going to change, but everyone gets to be involved. So if there's someone who's writing a check, then you get to write a check for this. Now, if you're writing a check and it's not for the impact, we don't want it. That might sound really crazy, but we don't want your money. If you're writing us a check because it has these other strings attached, we don't want it, because we're going after this impact. And then, so that's the solution. And the problem, we already know what the problem is. We've got multiple problems. So one is on the animal side, we've got too many animals that are not where they should be in their loving homes, in their future homes, or saved from coming out of their other home. The other side of that, we've got human beings who are struggling with mental health issues. When we say 1 in 5 human beings right now, Americans have mental health issues, we know that we can be a solution to that. So bringing those things together, we're focusing on what's behind the impact. Then we will stay focused on the mission and the vision and the way that we drive it. And we have to revisit it all the time. You don't get in a car and someone tells you, you got to drive across 7 states and go to this restaurant and just hop in and look at the directions once, hop in and just drive all the way there. We got to constantly look and say, hey, is there traffic? Is there bad weather? Am I on the right road? We have a purpose in getting.
Can I just add on to that too, Diaz? I think about the idea that, the statistic you just gave about 1 in 5 Americans have mental health issues. And I don't know how well we are, how much we actually know about the communities we live in. I know I didn't know that when I was out in the field. And so when I approach an address, or when I approach someone and they're displaying mental issues, I just look at them as this individual person. But the reality is that, this is a problem or an issue in our community as a whole. And had I looked at it like that when I was out in the field, as a more of a, an issue that the community, that is a problem in the community, I think it would have definitely it would have definitely directed me in a different direction in terms of how I looked at that individual when I approached them. I would actually look at them as a human being and not as just a call that I got from dispatch that said, go out and enforce. So yeah, thanks. That's just something that came up for me. So thanks for saying that.
I love that visual that in that story that you just gave that, Vincent. It shows us that if we're not constantly monitoring where we are personally, that we will drift ourselves and fall into these molds that aren't necessarily healthy. I wanted to just address something really quick. Eliza, thank you for sending me the question. Someone had a question for me in the chat. Did I ever ask any of those organizations why they weren't going to the People World meetings? I did not. But when I took over, when I became the CEO of the Nevada Humane Society, one of the first things I did, I looked around and saw that there really wasn't this connection. So I continued to go to those meetings, which resulted in, and as I'm doing this and I'm learning more about our own industry, the animal welfare, I go to a conference and I learn about the cortisone levels in dogs and how difficult it is for all the pets when they're sitting in cages. And I'm going, no way, look at these stats. This is horrible. I got to figure out a way to help the mental health of these pets. So I come back and I go to my meetings and I start talking about it. And people started volunteering and they said, hey, I'll help you build. What do you want? I said, I want a new dog park. So within 2 weeks, we raised $250,000. And we had over another 200,000 of in-kind donations. People were going to bring out their tractors. They cleared out this whole land, and we were going to create this dog park so that every dog would get a release at least once a week to have their own little free run. Now, I tell that story not because of, it wasn't really anything I did, but what I did was I took information we already knew and I put it in the hands and in the minds of other people who thought, that's horrible. How can I be part of the solution in helping with this? Now I had to be ready with an idea of what we could do with it. That's why it's really, really important because, and 3 people on this call are going to shake their heads because they hear me say this all the time, but the importance of friend raising is every bit as important as fundraising.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And just my 2 cents on the whole mission subject. I think that when we take a step back from our daily animal work and we see how much human suffering could be prevented if we did things a little bit differently, we actually can see that a future where not so many animals are coming into the shelter. And so feeling completely overwhelmed by the volume of animals and trying to save all their lives. And if we can connect these dots more thoroughly, like the mission of Austin Pets Alive is to eliminate the deaths of animals in shelters. And so the most direct way to do that is to take them off euthanasia lists and save their lives. But the less direct and maybe more sustainable and impactful way is to help the people that are needlessly turning them into shelters or not reclaiming them from shelters to begin with. So I think that it really does take some scrutiny to think about your mission and figure out what is the best thing? What is the best way to achieve your mission? And I suspect that for all animal organizations, helping the people is one of the best ways that we can possibly achieve whatever is written in our IRS guidelines. Okay, this is great. And tons of really good stuff in the chat. Some great programs coming up. These are fantastic. Being written down there. Okay, I want to ask one more question. So this one is maybe more of a list, but for the programs that are out there that help people, which ones help animals too? That was a question we got last time. I think we kind of touched on it, but I'm thinking maybe if we could specifically say.
Ask that question one more time, Ellen.
Let me read it verbatim.
Okay.
Because probably my translation didn't work. Okay, what are some of the services that can be provided to humans that would benefit animals?
So, right off the top of my head, I think of one of the programs that when I was the CEO of the Philadelphia Animal Care and Control Team of Philadelphia, we worked with a program called New Leash on Life, and that was a program where animals were put into live with incarcerated people in the prisons, and that person not only lived with that animal, and it's a fabulous program, but they also we partnered with them to New Leash on Life would pay for them to not pretty much to work in our shelter for a period of time. I think it was 3 months, if I remember correctly. And then if we felt like it worked out, then we would hire them full time. And we hired quite a few people that were formerly incarcerated. It helped them re-enter into society. It gave them that, like the program called the New Leash on Life, but it was also very empowering. It was probably one of the most inspiring things that I have been a part of, just to watch people and to be able to have them feel like they have a place to come. And they don't have the stereotype of, well, they've been in prison, so how are they going to treat an animal, which is a barrier that a lot of them have, or just stereotypes in general. And so I think a program like that I really felt like is not only helped human beings, but also was extremely inspiring too. And then also helped to build bridges and break down stereotypes.
When I was at Nevada Humane Society, we started a program that worked with halfway homes and with some DV shelters. And what we would do is we would take all the animals that were in what we called winter, a lot of the animals that weren't ready to go on the floor yet because of medical conditions, they would be the hosts. And so you would now have this pet that goes into a house of 12 people, and they're just constantly being loved on. And we provided all the food and medical needs at the time. And if by the time we were ready to bring the pet back to go back out on the floor, typically someone in the program was graduating and they were just like in tears over the possibility of not being able to adopt that pet. Or if they came back, they were so conditioned and so used to being loved that they just presented really well. So if they went into a kennel, they're at the front of the kennel because they hadn't been sitting in the back forever, just waiting to be fed and cleaned up after. And it was a total win-win. And like Vincent said, we had a program in the prison as well, where we had 12 terminal cats that went into the prison. And after a couple of months, 9 of those 12 cats no longer showed any of their terminal signs.
Wow. I just want to share that there's a lot of resources going off in the chat. People are sharing the sources that they're using to help people help pets. So please check those out too.
And I would just say, make sure y'all put it to everyone, not just to hosts and panelists. Otherwise, everybody who's on here won't be able to see it. But this is, this is really, really important stuff. And I think we're guilty. We touched on this at the last webinar, but the idea of trying to fix problems after they're already so big and it's overwhelming and really difficult. It's kind of true here too, where we've got helping the animals in the shelter is important, and I wouldn't change at all what we're doing and what so many organizations are doing in terms of trying to help so many animals. But if we start to really realize that it's the end of the line, as opposed to something that could be approached a lot earlier and maybe a lot smarter. We're so alone in the work we do, and that's part of what we talked about last time as well. And I think I think it does fall on us. Vincent said this, but I think it falls on us to say we shouldn't be alone. There's all these other people out here, and we can we can reach out to them and say, I need help with this, and just start the dialogue. And that gets at least hopefully stops this sort of circular problem of us always being at the end of the line and us being part of this process earlier on. It opens up doors to partnerships. It takes a lot of the weight off of us. It allows for greater exposure from policymakers and donors and grants and government grants and all of the above that animals don't get by themselves. And so I think it, as we keep talking about this, I just think it's important to understand the massive impact of the H in HASS. It's not just the beginning of the word. It really is integral to everything we're doing. All right, let me move to another question. I'm going to sort of change gears a little bit. Last time we talked about debriefing and how animal shelters and professionals within the animal shelter, and I think I speak for veterinarians, and I know Vincent was speaking for animal control officers, we're not really taught how to handle all the horrible things we see. And I think every position within the shelter is has the same problem. I mentioned the two professions because they should have something, but there's not. And so one of the questions we got after talking about that was, how do we debrief with staff about challenges in the shelter, especially when working more closely with the human struggles? And I'll just open that up to anybody that wants to answer it.
Dr. J, could you ask it one more time?
How do we debrief with staff about challenges in the shelter, especially when working more closely with human struggles?
I would say debriefing it's tough because a lot of emotions kind of will come up, right? And if you're not equipped to deal with those emotions, it could be a very overwhelming conversation, right? And it could be a conversation that the person leading it could be like, whoa, I can't do this. I'm not going to do that again, because that was opening Pandora's box, so to speak. But I think that when we're debriefing, right, it's important that staff on the ground are leading those conversations to be able to say, this is what I'm seeing. This is what we're experiencing as we see these things, right? These are the challenges that are coming up for us with whatever resources we have. These are the challenges that are coming up for the people and the animals that we're serving, right? It's a lot of troubleshooting, and it's a lot of space to be able to say, that was hard, what I had to deal with today, right? It was difficult for me to understand maybe where that person was coming from because of the beliefs I already have in place, right? It was difficult to empathize with that person because I was so busy kind of trying to figure out how to help this animal in that moment. And it's about coming together and saying, like, how can we really make sure that doesn't happen again the next time around?
You know, I would also say make debriefing a part of the culture. And I will, and this is some of the stories I have just as an officer are, they sound extreme, but they happen a lot to, especially animal control officers. I remember when I went to my first call of a drunken driving situation where people were killed, but there was an animal in the car that survived, and I had to be the one that responded. It was on the graveyard shift to go out and retrieve the animal for the rest of the family, and the people were still in the car dead, and nobody in my shop, this was like 2001, nobody in my shop they knew about the call. Nobody in the shop said to me, or in the shelter said to me, hey, how you doing after seeing that? And so I had to learn to deal with it on my own. And when I became a sergeant, what we did is I did check-ins. So there's two things that I think about. You check in with your people, like, hey, especially after something traumatic, whether it's at the front counter and there's a horrific situation, or somebody, even if somebody is really hostile, check in with your staff. And then also remember, you're not a psychologist, you're not a psychiatrist, you're not a counselor. So most of the time there are resources you can refer them to. but I always, anybody who works with me knows one of my favorite lines is I watch all my people, and watch your folks, understand how they think and what they're going through, and always make sure that they have an open line of communication to you, and to not just to you, but to other supervisors and trusted members of the staff that they can air their thoughts and feelings to. And then the last thing I would say is to seek out some training for compassion fatigue that will help your staff, or help you and your staff build a culture where things like burnout, I saw that in the chat, are openly discussed, not only during someone's employment, but I recommend it at orientation. Let's talk about burnout. Let's talk about what you're going to go through on this job, so that if it feels natural for an employee, whether they're new or already part of the team, for them to come to you and talk to you about, or to reach out if they need some assistance.
I think that's great, Vincent. I think it's really important that we create safe spaces. And like looking in the chat, there are some great things that are going on over there that you guys have put in the chat, and we really need to pull these resources together so that all across the country we know these things are going on. We can utilize some of the free online stuff, as well as be able to tap into some of the great ideas and emulate them in our own places. I think when people are coming to us as staff, we have to be ready to say, listen to them what the problem is, and then ask them what are some potential solutions. Because oftentimes, whether staff or volunteers, they're working in the trenches, they know some of the things that would really work. And we can try those things out, put those in place, because then it builds trust that we value what they have to say, where they're coming from. And then on the other heavier pieces, trauma's trauma. And, it can harm a person's ability to feel safe, their sense of self, and their ability to regulate their own emotions and navigate through relationships. So now if we've got staff that are having difficulty with their own emotions and navigating through these relationships, how are they treating the people who are coming in to adopt or surrender? It's now having a domino effect on our organization. So we got to pay really, really close attention to it and make sure that we're meeting people where they're at and we're giving them what they need.
Yeah. Compassion fatigue and burnout will have staff, people in general, feeling very isolated and alone. And those debriefings that we're talking about, those check-ins that we're talking about, that allows folks to know that they're not on an island, that other people are feeling this way. And while it's not great to hear that, wow, everyone feels this way, or so many people feel this way like me, and it's not a good feeling, it helps normalize it, right? Like, it's important to know that at some point in any helping profession, you are going to experience compassion fatigue, right? Let's get ahead of it. Let's have these conversations now, so that way people are prepared when they start to see those symptoms that they don't stick out right away. It's also not something that happens overnight, right? So it's important to kind of have those tools in your back pocket. So when you start to feel this way, before you fall down that rabbit hole, you're really able to pick yourself back up and support each other in that pickup too.
Well, and think about that. If you don't have the support, and we're not supporting each other, and we're struggling with certain things, how are we going to be in position for the person who's struggling with the pain of having to surrender their pet? How are we going to be strong for them in that moment, and being able to identify the resources that can give them the support that maybe stop them from it? If we're already burnt out and they're at the end, but we're already at the end of our rope, it becomes a number now. We're just going through the motions. And we also need to identify our team members who are around. It's like, okay, you know what? Vincent looks like he's having a hard time today. Let me step up and let me handle some of this for him and tap him out. And the officers do this in a lot of police forces, where if someone, say that they're dealing with someone who's upset, fired up, and that person hits the officer, they have what they call a tap out. So now that this guy has just hit me, Vincent comes, taps me out, pulls me out, because he removes me because I'm emotionally charged and maybe not stable enough to deal with it in that moment, and he can de-escalate. I think we really need to look at how we can do that for one another as well in the show.
And find that empathy.
Yeah, and you know, one thing I'll add on real quick is that I know it was powerful for my staff when I opened up about my own struggles, about, you know, and some of the ways I dealt with them. I think one of the most powerful meetings I was part of is when I did talk to the staff about using the employee assistance program, because, you know, there were some things that I was working on that a lot of them were job related, but, you know, as a human being, um, you know, it's not only job, it's also my life and my, you know, how it's affecting my family. And so as a leader, you know, just always feel like you can be vulnerable, obviously within a professional and context, but lead your team to that vulnerability through your own vulnerability.
Well, I think you sort of answered one of the questions that was coming up next, and that is how can we build a better solution-oriented culture in our organization when stress is so high? What do you do when stress is causing conflict? And I don't know if you want to elaborate on anything you said, or I feel like we covered that pretty well, but it's kind of a perfect setup for that next question.
You know, it's one thing when stress is high and it's constantly coming, it's hard to remember, which is why I am definitely an advocate of building some type of regular meeting or some form of debriefing that is consistent, whether it's, you know, the morning and evening huddles, but find some way to build it in and schedule it, because all of us know when we get that volume, you know, I had a mentor, he would always say, you know, what gets you is the volume. It's, you know, and it's constantly coming, and there's always something new. And the only people that know that are you all. You can talk to your family about it. You can talk to other members of, like, if you work for a government outside of the shelter, they don't understand it. And so, you know, the reality is that it's up to us to build the systems internally that make it possible for us to visit it, whether it's a calendar meeting or some way, or and you know, some of you are fortunate enough to maybe have a safety officer, but somebody whose responsibility it is to to oversee that and make that part of the you know, part of the shelter culture.
Yeah, and do you, I guess, do you have any quick tips on how to turn a negative culture towards a solution culture? I know we just said that, but I guess I'm just wondering, and maybe I don't want to belabor it if we feel like we covered it too much, but I do you know what I'm trying to ask slightly differently? Asking you to read my mind.
I
I,
think,
I know what you're asking. Oh, go ahead, Diaz. Were you going to say something?
no, you dive in, you dive in.
You know, I get to know your people. Trust is one of the reasons why we don't speak up. Well, at least I can speak for myself and for the experiences I had. Build that bond of trust, because I'll tell you, the best team that saved the most lives, that had the best, I think, team of officers, that had the most progressive of a lot of areas, and was the one where on our worst day, we had each other. And that meant so much to me, to be able to know that I could trust the people that I worked with. And from my vantage point, it was up to me as a leader to build that environment, or to make way for it, but then also build other people up. And I would say this, another thing: compliment, 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 compliment. Like, build the emotional bank up. I have had employees that are like, man, I can't believe, I don't think I can live up to all of these good things you're saying about me. Fill up people's emotional tanks. Don't let yourself get so bogged down in the day-to-day that you forget to tell people how much you appreciate them.
Yeah. I would add to that, you know, celebrating accomplishments needs to be the norm, right? When you are overwhelmed and overworked, it is really easy to get stuck in the negative and difficult parts of the day. And it's easy to kind of forget all the good that you're doing. Encouraging staff to take breaks, reminding them that you are an avenue of support. I think there's a lot of ways, but I think there are little ways that really need to be consistent over time in order to see that change. And I think that it's really important for organizations to know that it might get worse before it gets better, because folks are going to really kind of like offload once they feel comfortable, and things are going to come up, and it's going to seem like, whoa, all these things are happening. But in that discomfort, again, in that mess, that's when the work is happening, and that's when the change can happen.
Well, we have a couple of questions that I'm hoping we can maybe get through both of them in the next 10 minutes, but one of them is in the Q&A. And from Sarita Lopez, it says, what would you recommend to organizations that see the benefit of sharing social service resources with individuals who come in, but are struggling to go a step further and help with making the phone calls due to lack of staff or time? Do you think it's time to have a social worker on staff or an individual whose role is to offer that specific type of support, or something else?
If I can jump in on this one, there are, 70% of Americans own pets. So there are a ton of people that absolutely love and adore pets. There are a lot of people who are working in the helping field, whether they're case managers, social workers, counselors alike. They oftentimes are doing volunteer services at different places. So if we can't necessarily afford it in the budget, but it is something that we can put out that we're looking for and volunteer for someone to come in and fill this role, maybe that's where we start. And when we see the great benefit of it, we can roll in looking for support after we've done this for a while. I do think it's time for us to start engaging those roles and those positions and seeing it as a great liaison into the social service world, into the human world. And we need to figure out how to make it happen. And for most of us, when we want to make something happen, most of you guys on this call, if you want to make something happen, you usually do.
I would say, to continue to look at it as, don't look at it always as where a really great program is, and that is already built out, that already has the support. Look at them from the standpoint of, where did they start? And I would start somewhere. I would start anywhere, because you don't have to always have a fully fleshed out idea. In fact, all you really need is the passion and the desire to solve that issue. And so what I would say is, feel free to start off small and don't over expect. Expectation is the thief of joy. And so just start off with something that you can do, knowing that eventually you're going to be able to build. That'll be the foundation that you can build on.
Awesome. Okay.
Ellen, if I can add one more thing.
Go for it. Yeah.
Know that HASS is going to be your resource. So, we are actively engaged, and we're talking about this every week. The four of us on this call, actually, I should say the six of us, two that you can't see. We're actively engaged, and HASS is going to be your resource. And if we don't have the answer, we're going to be able to point and connect you to others that are a part of our network.
There's a couple of questions in the chat that are a question and a comment that came up. And I think, we're talking about trying to create a community within your organization and support the people that are doing the work. But there's still inevitably people who feel very alone, or feel like for whatever reason they can't talk to their coworkers, or we often talk about the leader at the top. I think one of the comments was about. Any other thoughts on that to help people who maybe don't feel like they have either the ability to create the safety net within their organization, or a safety net of their own?
I'm going to be blunt about this. I would leave the organization and find a place that if I felt like that I was not able, because let me tell you, I will say this about myself. I've collapsed at work. I've had health problems because I was not, because I allowed myself to feel isolated. A person could die. And we know people that have died or have done, or even have done worse to themselves. And so your safety and your mental health and your health is all you and your family have. And I would say, if you felt unsafe, and it's some advice I'm giving to my younger self, I would either have changed my dynamic by seeking out help that I couldn't get through my work, or I probably would advise my younger self to leave and find a new environment where I could thrive and still do the things that I want to do.
That's pretty blunt. I like it. I think, as this human animal support services project, and I think collectively, even whatever you call it, everybody has been thinking more about how to have some balance in your life since COVID. I think that was a real moment of reckoning for the animal industry. And I guess I would just put in a plug for HASS and some of the other, like the Maddie's calls and the different places where people are coming together to work on solutions and find that outlet. For those of us that are driven, like everybody on this call, driven to make a difference in this field, and finding it so difficult, I think we need to find each other. And it may lead to another organization that you work within, but I think there's enough of us out here, and that's part of what I mentioned at the very beginning is HASS. One of the big outcomes that we're looking for with HASS is collective voice for change. And so we need to come together. We need to have these conversations. We need to not be okay with the status quo, because nobody's going to change it for us. And so if we don't speak up, nobody's going to speak up on our behalf. And it's just going to be the same thing in 25 years that it is now. So if you haven't joined the HASS project, please do. And I know we have 3 minutes. I'm going to try to drag this one last question in, unless somebody wants to say another word about that. But here we go. So how do you determine what programs are most needed within your community? Wondering where to even start with creating programs mentioned within HASS.
Well, I think we got to get to know our community. And we have to get to know our community by getting outside the walls of our shelter. Historically, we haven't done a great job of that. And so we're going to find that we learn a lot more than what we've just seen through our own goggles.
You know, I would also say use your 311 data. Those calls for service are not only indicators of who is quote unquote violating the law, but they're also, if you change the lens and change your viewpoint, it's also a collection of what the community needs. So if there's an area of town where a lot of animals are running loose, working past just the call itself and helping to diagnose the reason why and how you can provide programs that will assist with that, whether it's fence fixing or leashes or a robust microchip program. That's where I would start.
You can also connect with your mayor's office or the governor's office for needs assessment surveys that have been done and things like that, to kind of organizations that have already done the legwork, and you can just pull from that information.
Yeah, and I would just add that you can start with your lobby. Just go ask people what they need. There's a whole bunch of chat in there about how we're usually too overwhelmed. We may be hardwired to not really ask those questions and dive deep with the human part of it, but people are right there. just ask them. And then you talk to enough people, you start to notice the trends and see where you can start making a difference. All right. Well, we got to the end of this really fast. Thank you so much. You guys are amazing panelists, and feel like every time I talk to you, I learn a ton. So I really appreciate this and appreciate everybody who came out tonight too. All right. We'll see you later. Thanks.